The year is 1994. The internet is a ghost town. No maps. No guides. No rules. Just millions of scattered web pages floating in digital darkness, waiting to be found. Two Stanford PhD students, Jerry Yang and David Philo, are sitting inside a trailer on campus, doing something nobody asked them to do. They are building a list. A hand-curated, category-by-category directory of every interesting website they could find. They called it Jerry's Guide to the World Wide Web. It was messy. It was obsessive. It was genius. And within months, millions of people were using it every single day. They renamed it Yahoo. Yet another hierarchical officious oracle. A joke name for a product that would become the front door of the entire internet. By 1996, Yahoo was the most visited website on the planet. By 1999, it was valued at over $125 billion. Bigger than Amazon. Bigger than Boeing. Bigger than most things anyone had ever seen in the history of business. Jerry Yang and David Philo were not just tech founders. They were the kings of a new world. And then they destroyed it. Slowly. Painfully. Completely. This is the forensic story of how Yahoo invented the tools that built Google's empire, made every right move at the wrong time, and sold itself for scraps to a phone company while the world watched in silence. This is not just a business story. This is a cautionary tale written in code, carved in boardroom decisions, and sealed with the digital equivalent of a self-inflicted wound. Jerry Yang grew up in San Jose, California. Born in Taiwan, he moved to America at age 10 speaking almost no English. Within 3 years he was fluent. Within a decade he was at Stanford studying electrical engineering. David Philo was from Louisiana, quiet, intensely focused, the kind of person who would rather optimize a system than talk about it. Together they were not trying to build a company. They were procrastinating on their dissertations. The directory was a hobby. A way to bookmark the sites they liked and organize the chaos of the early web. But the traffic came anyway. Stanford's servers started crashing under the load of people visiting their little guide. The university asked them to move it off campus. So they did. They took venture capital from Sequoia, the same firm that would later back Google and YouTube, and in April 1995, Yahoo officially incorporated. By the end of that year they had their first advertising revenue. By 1996 they went public. The IPO raised $33 million on the first day. Two procrastinating PhD students had accidentally built one of the most valuable companies in human history. The portal era was everything. Yahoo was not just a search engine. It was the internet itself for millions of people. You opened your browser and Yahoo was there. You checked your email on Yahoo Mail. You looked at photos on Yahoo Photos. You got your news from Yahoo News. You managed your stock portfolio on Yahoo Finance. You chatted on Yahoo Messenger. The little purple Y with the exclamation mark was the most recognized logo on the web. And for a moment, a long, golden, euphoric moment, it seemed like nothing could stop them. But 1998 changed everything. And almost nobody at Yahoo noticed. Two more Stanford students, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, had developed something in their dorm room that would eventually be called PageRank. It was not just a better search engine. It was a fundamentally different way of thinking about information. Yahoo organized the internet the way a librarian organizes books, by category, by subject, by human judgment. Google organized the Internet the way the Internet organized itself, by trust, by connection, by the invisible votes that every hyperlink represented. One system required armies of human editors working around the clock. The other got smarter every single second without anyone lifting a finger. Page and Brin did not want to run a company. They were academics. They wanted to publish papers, finish dissertations, and return to the quiet world of university research. So before they did anything else, they went to the company that owned the Internet. They walked into Yahoo's offices and made the simplest offer in the history of Silicon Valley. Take this technology. Make it yours. $1 million and we walk away forever. Yahoo's executives listened. They nodded. They deliberated. And then they said no. The reason they said no was more important than the no itself. Yahoo did not reject Google because they thought the technology was bad. They rejected it because they thought search was irrelevant. Their internal belief, stated openly in meetings, written into strategy documents, repeated by executives on earnings calls, was that Yahoo was a destination. A portal. A home. People did not come to Yahoo to search and leave. They came to Yahoo to stay. To read the news. To check their email. To look at sports scores and stock prices and celebrity gossip. Search was the door you walked through. Once you were inside, the door did not matter anymore. Why would you spend $1 million on a door? What they failed to understand, what would cost them everything, is that the door is always the most important part. The door determines whether people enter at all. And when Google built a better door, the entire world walked through it and never came back. Page and Brin incorporated Google in September 1998 in a garage in Menlo Park belonging to a woman named Susan Wojcicki, who would later become YouTube's CEO. The symmetry of that detail is almost too perfect to be believed. The person who gave Google its first home would go on to run the platform that Google would acquire and turn into the second most visited website on Earth. Everything in Silicon Valley is connected. Yahoo just refused to be part of the connection. In the months after Google's founding, the contrast between the two companies became visible to anyone paying attention. Yahoo added features. Google subtracted them. Yahoo's homepage grew more cluttered with every passing month, more links, more advertisements, more categories, more content fighting for attention. Google's homepage remained almost offensively minimal. A logo. A search bar. 2 buttons. Nothing else. It was a statement of philosophy rendered in negative space. We believe in one thing. We do it better than anyone. Come find out what you are looking for and trust that we will show you. Users felt the difference immediately. Searches that took multiple attempts on Yahoo resolved in a single query on Google. Results that felt random on Yahoo felt precise on Google. The experience of using Google Search in 1999 and 2000 was genuinely unlike anything people had felt on the Internet before. It felt like the Internet finally understood what you were asking. By 2000, the dot-com bubble had burst. The Nasdaq lost 78% of its value in 18 months. Billions of dollars in Internet valuations evaporated overnight. Pets.com disappeared. Webvan collapsed. Cosmo.com burned through $280 million and shut its doors. The entire landscape of the early Internet was littered with the wreckage of companies that had mistaken funding for a business model and traffic for profitability. Yahoo survived. Their revenue dropped significantly, their stock fell from its peak, but they had real users, real advertising relationships, and real infrastructure that had been built over years. They were a genuine business in a landscape full of mirages. And survival in that moment gave them something dangerous. It gave them confidence. It confirmed their belief that they had been right all along. That focus, that portal strategy, that decision to be everything to everyone, it had worked. While others collapsed, Yahoo stood. So why change anything? This is the psychology that destroys great companies. Survival in a crisis feels like victory. But survival is not the same as winning. Yahoo survived the dot-com crash the way a patient survives surgery, alive, but weakened, and in need of something more than the fact of their own continued existence. Instead of using the crash as a moment of radical simplification and refocus, Yahoo doubled down on the portal strategy. And to lead the doubling down, the board made a decision that would define the next 7 years of the company's decline. They hired Terry Semel. Semel was not a technology executive. He was not a product person. He was not an engineer or a designer or someone who had spent his career thinking about what users needed from the internet. He was a Hollywood executive. Former co-chairman of Warner Brothers. A man who had spent 3 decades navigating the entertainment industry, managing talent, closing deals, producing content, building relationships with studios and networks and distribution channels. He was impressive, charming, and completely wrong for the job. Under Semel, Yahoo's identity became something genuinely confused. Were they a technology company? A media company? An entertainment portal? A search engine? An advertising platform? The answer, depending on which executive you asked on which day, was yes to all of them. And a company that tries to be everything ends up being nothing, not because the individual pieces are bad, but because the absence of a clear center of gravity means that every decision pulls in a different direction and nothing ever reaches its full potential. Semel pursued content deals with Hollywood studios. He invested in sports broadcasting rights. He tried to position Yahoo as a premium entertainment destination that happened to have search functionality. The engineers who had been working on Yahoo's search technology, who had been watching Google's growth with increasing alarm, who had been writing internal memos about the existential threat posed by a search engine that was better in every measurable way, were being ignored, underfunded, and in many cases actively pushed out. The internal culture began to fracture. Yahoo had been founded by engineers. The company's DNA was technical. Its early success had come from people who cared obsessively about how things worked. Under Semel, the power shifted to business development executives, content producers, and dealmakers. Engineers who raised concerns about the product were told to focus on their work and leave strategy to the people who understood the business. The people who understood the business did not understand the product. And the product was falling further behind every single day. In 2002, Yahoo made another catastrophic non-decision. Google was now growing at a rate that even the most optimistic Yahoo executive could no longer explain away. The little garage startup had become a genuine threat. And it was still small enough, still young enough, still financially vulnerable enough that an acquisition was entirely feasible. The price discussed was approximately $3 billion. In the context of what Yahoo was worth at that time, $3 billion was not a small number. But it was also not an impossible one. It was the kind of number that great companies pay to own the future before the future owns them. Yahoo negotiated. Yahoo deliberated. Yahoo sent delegations to Google's offices, held meetings, reviewed financial projections, and ultimately decided that $3 billion was too much. The gap between the two companies after that decision was never closed again. Every single year from 2002 forward, the cost of acquiring Google increased to $10 billion, to $50 billion, to $100 billion, to entirely beyond reach. The $3 billion decision became the most expensive hesitation in corporate history. In 2003, Yahoo made an acquisition that looked smart on paper and proved disastrous in practice. They purchased Overture's services for $1.6 billion. Overture had pioneered pay-per-click advertising, the model where advertisers pay only when users actually click on their advertisements rather than simply viewing them. It was the exact model that Google had adopted and refined into the engine of its financial dominance. Yahoo now owned the original technology. They had the patent. They had the infrastructure. They had the user base that dwarfed Google's at that point. And they still lost. Because owning technology is not the same as having the culture to deploy it. Google's advertising system, AdWords and AdSense, was not just a mechanism for selling clicks. It was a product built by people who understood search at a fundamental level, who knew how to connect user intent with advertiser relevance in ways that felt helpful rather than intrusive. Yahoo's advertising, even with Overture's technology, continued to feel like interruption. Google's felt like assistance. The difference sounds subtle. In practice, it determined which company would eventually control $200 billion in annual advertising revenue. By 2004, Google filed for its initial public offering. The IPO valued the company at $23 billion. For context, Yahoo had rejected Google for $1 million 6 years earlier. The mathematics of that rejection require no further elaboration. The same year, Google launched Gmail. Free email with 1 full gigabyte of storage at a moment when Yahoo Mail's standard offering was 4 megabytes. Yahoo scrambled to match it, eventually offering unlimited storage in a desperate response. But the scramble itself was the story. Yahoo was reacting. Google was leading. And the distance between those two positions was growing wider with every product launch. Marissa Mayer had joined Google in 1999 as the company's 20th employee. She had been offered jobs at 18 other companies before choosing Google. She chose Google because of the intellectual intensity, because of the obsession with data, because of the culture that treated every product decision as a problem to be solved rather than a preference to be expressed. At Google, she built the homepage that became iconic in its simplicity. She ran search product management with a precision that other engineers described as almost frightening. She tested everything. She measured everything. She refused to make a product decision without data to support it, and she built a team around her that shared that philosophy. Yahoo had engineers of comparable talent. They had people who could have built what Mayer's team built at Google. But those people were not being given the resources, the authority, or the cultural permission to operate with that kind of obsessive focus. They were being managed by executives who believed that search was a commodity and that the real value was in the content wrapped around it. So they left. One by one, in a slow and devastating drain, Yahoo's best technical talent walked out the door and went to Google, to startups, to anywhere that felt like what they built would matter. The years between 2005 and 2012 represent a period of such sustained and spectacular mismanagement that business schools will be teaching it for generations. 7 CEOs in 5 years. Each one arriving with a new vision, a new strategy, a new organizational structure, a new set of priorities that required dismantling the priorities of the person before them. Each departure creating uncertainty, exodus of talent, loss of institutional knowledge, and a message to the market that Yahoo did not know what it was or where it was going. Terry Semel finally left in 2007 after 5 years of steady decline. He had collected hundreds of millions of dollars in compensation during a period when Yahoo's competitive position had deteriorated catastrophically. Jerry Yang, the founder, took back control. There is something both admirable and tragic about a founder returning to a struggling company. Admirable because it represents genuine love for what was built, tragic because the problems are usually systemic in ways that passion alone cannot fix. Yang returned to a company that was still enormous by most measures, hundreds of millions of users, billions in revenue, a brand that was recognized everywhere on Earth. But the trajectory was wrong and everyone could see it. Google's search market share was climbing past 70%. Yahoo's was falling below 20%. The gap was not a temporary fluctuation. It was a structural reality that reflected 6 years of underinvestment in the one thing that mattered most. In February 2008, Microsoft made its move. Steve Ballmer offered $44 billion for Yahoo. $44 billion. For a company whose stock had been declining for years. It was a premium of 62% above Yahoo's market price at the time. It was, by any rational measure, a transformative offer that recognized Yahoo's assets, its user base, its brand, its international presence, its advertising infrastructure, at a valuation that Yahoo's own trajectory made it impossible to justify on its own. Jerry Yang rejected it. The internal reasoning was that $44 billion undervalued Yahoo, that the company's true worth was higher, that a deal with Microsoft would compromise Yahoo's independence and culture. Some of this reasoning had merit in isolation. None of it had merit in context. The context was a company that had missed every strategic opportunity of the previous decade, that was bleeding market share in its core business, that had failed to retain the engineers who could have rebuilt what had been lost, and that was now being offered $44 billion by a buyer who genuinely believed in its potential. Microsoft withdrew the offer in May 2008. Yahoo stock, which had risen on the news of the bid, collapsed back down to levels below where it had been before. Jerry Yang stepped down as CEO months later. The $44 billion offer became a symbol not of Yahoo's value, but of how comprehensively its leadership had failed to understand the difference between what something is worth and what someone is willing to pay for it. Carol Bartz arrived in January 2009. She was direct, profane, and refreshingly free of corporate euphemism. In interviews, she described Yahoo's situation with brutal honesty that journalists found compelling and employees found terrifying. She cut costs aggressively. She restructured the organization. She signed a search partnership deal with Microsoft that outsourced Yahoo's search technology to Bing, effectively admitting that Yahoo had lost the search war and would no longer compete directly with Google for search supremacy. The Bing deal was simultaneously pragmatic and devastating. Pragmatic because it allowed Yahoo to reduce the enormous cost of maintaining search infrastructure that could not compete with Google's. Devastating because search had been Yahoo's founding purpose, and outsourcing it to Microsoft was the organizational equivalent of a musician giving up their instrument. It freed up resources. It also permanently altered what Yahoo was at its core. Bartz was fired in September 2011. The board chairman called her on the phone to tell her. She later revealed this publicly, describing the call with a directness that perfectly captured the dysfunction of Yahoo's leadership culture. She had been hired to fix a broken company, had made difficult and controversial decisions in service of that goal, and had been dismissed over the phone after 2.5 years without the basic professional courtesy of a face-to-face conversation. Scott Thompson followed. He came from PayPal with a reputation as a strong operational executive. Within months of his arrival, an activist investor revealed that Thompson's official biography listed a computer science degree from Stonehill College that he had not actually earned. The college had not offered a computer science degree when Thompson attended. The falsification was not a minor biographical embellishment. It was a lie on official filings submitted to regulators. Thompson resigned after 4 months. Ross Levinson served as interim CEO. The board then turned to the person they had been considering for the role all along. Marissa Mayer joined Yahoo as CEO in July 2012. She was 37 years old. She was pregnant. She was one of the most recognizable executives in Silicon Valley, having spent 13 years building some of Google's most important products. Her hire was announced while she was at the Sun Valley Conference, and the reaction from Wall Street, the press, and the technology industry was immediate and almost universally positive. Yahoo's stock rose. Headlines described her as a savior. The narrative wrote itself. The Google insider who understood what Yahoo had been missing was coming home to fix it. Mayer moved with genuine speed and genuine conviction. She improved the mobile applications that had been neglected for years. She redesigned the logo in a process that she live-streamed publicly, generating enormous media coverage. She introduced free food in the cafeteria and ended the remote work policy, requiring employees to come into the office in an attempt to rebuild the collaborative intensity that great product companies require. She made 37 acquisitions in 2 years, including the purchase of Tumblr for $1.1 billion in May 2013. The Tumblr acquisition was the most visible and the most instructive of her tenure. Tumblr was a blogging and social media platform beloved by young users, exactly the demographic Yahoo had been losing for years. Mayer described it as the key to reaching an audience that had never thought of Yahoo as relevant. The price reflected optimism about Tumblr's potential as an advertising platform and as a cultural signal that Yahoo was capable of acquiring things that young people cared about. Within 2 years it was clear that the integration was failing. Tumblr's culture and Yahoo's culture were fundamentally incompatible. Tumblr's users were there precisely because it felt independent, creative, and free from corporate interference. The moment Yahoo bought it, the feeling changed. Advertisers found it difficult to place ads on a platform where the content was unpredictable and frequently explicit. The revenue projections that had justified the $1.1 billion price never materialized. Mayer would eventually write down the value of the Tumblr acquisition to essentially nothing, a $1 billion lesson in the difference between acquiring an audience and understanding why that audience gathered in the first place. The deeper problem of Mayer's tenure was the same problem that had haunted Yahoo for a decade. The core search and advertising business was not recovering. Every quarter brought new evidence that the structural decline was continuing regardless of what was happening around it. Google's search market share climbed past 80%. Yahoo's fell below 10%. The mobile revolution that Mayer had identified correctly as the defining transition of the next decade was being dominated by Google on Android and Apple on iOS. Yahoo's mobile products, despite genuine investment and improvement, could not break through to relevance in a world where the phone in your pocket defaulted to Google for everything you searched for. Meanwhile, Yahoo's most valuable asset was not anything it had built. It was a stake in Alibaba, the Chinese e-commerce giant, that Yahoo had acquired in 2005 for $1 billion. By 2014, that stake was worth more than $30 billion. More than the entire market capitalization of Yahoo's core business. The company that had built the front door of the internet was now worth less than its investment in a Chinese shopping platform. The irony was so complete it required no embellishment. Mayer and the board spent the final years of her tenure maneuvering around the Alibaba stake, trying to find a way to return its value to shareholders without triggering billions of dollars in tax liability. The maneuvering was complex, the regulatory questions were genuinely difficult, and the time spent on it was time not spent on the fundamental questions of what Yahoo was and what it could become. Activist investors arrived in force. Starboard Value, one of the most aggressive shareholder activists in the market, acquired a significant stake and began a public campaign to transform Yahoo's direction. Starboard's letters to the board were extraordinarily detailed documents that laid out, quarter by quarter and year by year, the evidence of Yahoo's strategic failures. They called for cost cuts, leadership changes, and a fundamental reconsideration of whether Yahoo should exist as an independent company at all. The board resisted. Mayer resisted. But the numbers continued their inexorable movement in the wrong direction. Revenue from the core business, the advertising and search revenue that had once made Yahoo one of the most profitable companies in America, continued to decline. The attempts to diversify into video content, into news, into digital magazines, into native advertising, none of them reversed the trend. None of them could, because the fundamental problem was that Yahoo had no compelling answer to Google's search dominance and no compelling answer to Facebook's social media dominance, and those two facts left almost no space in the digital advertising market for a company that could not claim leadership in either category. In February 2016, Yahoo announced that it was exploring strategic alternatives, the corporate euphemism for "we are looking for a buyer." Verizon Communications, the telecommunications giant, emerged as the leading bidder for Yahoo's core internet assets. In July 2016, Verizon made an offer of $4.8 billion. $4.8 billion. The number deserves to be repeated slowly, held up against the light, examined for what it represents. In 1999, Yahoo had been valued at $125 billion. In 2008, Microsoft had offered $44 billion and been rejected. Now, 8 years later, the company that had been the king of the internet was selling for $4.8 billion to a phone company. Not to a technology company. Not to a media empire. To Verizon, a business that sold telephone contracts and cable television packages and had decided that owning Yahoo's brand and user base might help them compete in digital advertising. The deal was complicated almost immediately by one of the most significant revelations in the history of corporate data security. In September 2016, Yahoo disclosed that it had suffered a data breach in 2014 affecting 500 million user accounts. Usernames, email addresses, phone numbers, dates of birth, encrypted passwords, the personal information of 500 million people had been compromised, and Yahoo had known about it for 2 years without telling anyone. The disclosure came only after journalists began investigating. Then, in December 2016, Yahoo disclosed a second breach. This one had occurred in 2013 and affected 3 billion accounts. 3 billion. Every Yahoo account that had ever existed. Every email address, every password, every piece of personal information that users had trusted Yahoo with over 20 years of operation, all of it had been compromised in a single attack that the company had failed to detect, failed to disclose, and failed to remediate for 3 years. The scale of the breach was unprecedented. Nothing like it had ever happened in the history of the Internet. And the fact that Yahoo had known about portions of it for years without telling users was not just a legal failure, it was a profound moral failure that said something devastating about the values of the organization in its final years. Verizon renegotiated. They reduced their offer by $350 million, bringing the final price to $4.48 billion. The deal closed in June 2017. Yahoo's core internet business, the search engine, the email service, the news portal, the advertising platform, the brand was absorbed into a Verizon subsidiary called Oath. The Alibaba stake and the remaining Yahoo assets were reorganized into a separate investment company called Altaba, which was later dissolved. Marissa Mayer resigned when the deal closed. She received a severance package of approximately $23 million. Jerry Yang and David Filo, the founders who had built this entire empire from a Stanford trailer, watched from the sidelines as the company they had created as a procrastination project became a footnote in a telecommunications company's annual report. The engineers who had tried to sound the alarm were gone. The products that had once defined how the entire world experienced the internet were absorbed or shut down. Yahoo Messenger, which had been the dominant instant messaging platform of the late 90s and early 2000s, was discontinued in 2018. Yahoo Answers, a platform where hundreds of millions of people had asked and answered questions for 16 years, was shut down in 2021. Yahoo Groups, which had been one of the first large-scale online community platforms, was closed. The infrastructure was repurposed. The data was deleted. The history was archived. What remained was a brand, the purple Y with the exclamation mark, attached to a collection of media properties that Verizon eventually sold to a private equity firm called Apollo Global Management in 2021 for $5 billion. The company that bears the Yahoo name today is an investment holding company and a media business. It is profitable on a small scale. It is entirely irrelevant to the questions that define the future of technology. It is a ghost wearing the clothes of an empire. The forensic autopsy of Yahoo does not reveal a single fatal wound. What it reveals is a pattern, a way of making decisions that compounded over 15 years into an outcome that was, in retrospect, almost mathematically inevitable. The first element of the pattern is the confusion of features with foundations. Yahoo built search as a feature inside a portal. Google built a portal around a search engine. The distinction sounds semantic. It was existential. When search is a feature, you can deprioritize it, underfund it, assign it to a committee, and treat it as one item in a long list of things the product does. When search is the foundation, it receives every available resource, every available talent, every available hour of engineering attention, because without it there is nothing else. Yahoo never understood that the thing they had invented was not a feature of the Internet. It was the operating system of the Internet. Everything that came after search, advertising, maps, video, commerce, artificial intelligence, was built on top of the ability to find things. Yahoo invented finding things and then decided finding things was just one of many things they did. The second element of the pattern is the systematic devaluation of engineering talent. Every great technology company is, at its core, a community of engineers who believe that the problems they are solving matter. When that community feels heard, funded, and empowered, it produces extraordinary things. When it feels ignored, underfunded, and managed by people who do not understand what they are building, it leaves. Yahoo's engineering talent exodus from 2001 onwards was not a coincidence or an industry trend. It was a response to a culture that had stopped treating technical excellence as the central value. The engineers went to Google. Google got better because of them. Yahoo got worse because of their absence. The cycle fed itself for a decade. The third element is the CEO instability that made coherent strategy impossible. A company can survive a bad strategy if it pursues it long enough to learn and adapt. A company cannot survive a strategy that changes every 18 months. Each new CEO at Yahoo arrived with a mandate to fix what the previous CEO had broken, which meant dismantling the organizational structures, product priorities, and cultural signals that the previous CEO had put in place. By the time a new direction began to take hold, the person who had established it was gone and their successor was starting over. The institutional knowledge, the engineering culture, the product vision, all of it reset with every leadership transition. 7 resets in 5 years left Yahoo with no institutional memory and no coherent identity. The fourth element is the rejection of acquisition opportunities at prices that were, in retrospect, transformative. The Google rejection at $1 million is the most famous example, but it was not unique. Microsoft at $44 billion was rejected. Internal acquisition discussions about other emerging platforms were similarly dismissed or delayed until the opportunity passed. Yahoo's leadership consistently overestimated the company's ability to build competing products internally and underestimated the compound interest of letting competitors grow unchallenged. Every year that Google grew without Yahoo's interference made the gap harder to close and the eventual cost of closing it higher than Yahoo could afford. The fifth element is the data breach concealment that destroyed whatever remained of user trust. Companies that hold personal data have a fundamental obligation to the people who trusted them with it. When Yahoo learned of breaches affecting billions of accounts and chose not to disclose them, they did not just violate legal requirements. They violated the basic contract of trust that underpins every relationship between a technology platform and its users. The concealment, when revealed, confirmed the darkest possible interpretation of how Yahoo had always valued its users as metrics, as advertising inventory, as numbers in a quarterly report, rather than as people whose privacy deserved protection. The sixth and most profound element is the failure of imagination that prevented Yahoo from seeing what it was actually building. Yahoo built the architecture of curiosity. A system for organizing everything humans knew and wanted to know and were trying to find. In 1994, when Yang and Philo were cataloging websites in their Stanford trailer, they were doing something that no civilization in human history had ever done before, creating a navigable map of all recorded human knowledge. The implications of that project, pursued to its logical conclusion, are almost unlimited. Search becomes knowledge management, becomes artificial intelligence, becomes the infrastructure of everything that human civilization does with information. Google saw those implications. Yahoo saw a portal. The difference in vision determined the difference in outcome. 7 lessons. Carved from the wreckage. Written in the language of a company that had everything and lost it all. Lesson 1. Your core product is not a feature. It is your identity. The moment you treat the thing that made you irreplaceable as one item in a longer list, you have begun the process of making yourself replaceable. Guard the core with everything you have. Distraction is not diversification. It is dissolution. Lesson 2. Talent is not a resource. Talent is the company. Every engineer, every designer, every product thinker who walks out your door takes with them not just their skills but their institutional knowledge, their relationships, their creative potential, and their willingness to solve problems on your behalf. When the people who care most about making the product better stop believing that you care about the same thing, they leave. And what they build for someone else will be used against you. Lesson 3. Leadership consistency is a competitive advantage. Stability of vision, sustained over years, is one of the rarest and most valuable things a company can have. It allows teams to build on each other's work. It allows culture to develop depth. It allows strategy to compound in ways that become structural advantages. Instability undoes all of it. Every transition is a tax paid against accumulated progress. Lesson 4. The offer you reject defines you as much as the deal you close. Every decision not to act is itself a decision. When Yahoo rejected Google for $1 million, They were not simply declining a transaction. They were choosing a future. They chose wrong. The discipline to recognize transformative opportunities before they become unaffordable is one of the hardest and most important capabilities a leadership team can develop. Lesson 5. Market share lost is almost never recovered. There is a threshold in competitive markets below which recovery becomes structurally impossible. Once Google's search share passed 60%, the feedback loops that drove its continued dominance, more queries producing better results producing more users producing more queries, made the gap self-reinforcing. Yahoo crossed the threshold around 2004 and never found a way back. Know where your thresholds are. Defend them before you cross them, not after. Lesson 6. Users are not an audience. They are the reason the company exists. Every decision made at Yahoo in its final decade revealed a company that had forgotten this. The data breaches were the ultimate expression of it, a company that held 3 billion people's most personal information and chose to protect its own interests over the interests of the people who had trusted it. Companies that treat users as metrics eventually lose the users. And then there are no metrics left to manage. Lesson 7. Success is the most dangerous condition a company can experience. It creates comfort. It creates the illusion that whatever you did to get here will be sufficient to stay here. It creates defensiveness toward new ideas and new competitors and new ways of thinking about the problems you have already solved. Google was not a better company than Yahoo because Google was smarter. Google was a better company than Yahoo because Google never stopped behaving like it was fighting for survival, even after it had already won. The hunger that drove Page and Brin in that garage in Menlo Park never left the company's culture. The hunger that drove Yang and Philo in that Stanford trailer disappeared the moment the stock price hit $125 billion. And the day the hunger left was the day the decline began, even if nobody noticed for another 5 years. Yahoo built the front door of the Internet. They gave the world its first map of human knowledge. They created tools that hundreds of millions of people used every single day to navigate the most significant information revolution in the history of civilization. And then they forgot why they had built those tools. They forgot that the people using them were the point. They forgot that the technology serving them was the foundation. They forgot that every empire, no matter how large, requires constant tending, constant hunger, constant questioning, constant willingness to tear down what is comfortable in pursuit of what is necessary. Google did not steal Yahoo's empire. There was no theft. There was no single act of betrayal or sabotage or hostile takeover. There was only a slow, painful, entirely self-inflicted process of a great company choosing comfort over challenge, management over obsession, and the appearance of strategy over the substance of it. The greatest empires in history have not fallen to invaders. They have fallen to themselves. To the weight of their own assumptions. To the certainty that what made them great in the past would be sufficient for the future. Yahoo is the digital testament to that truth, written in purple, punctuated with an exclamation mark, and sold for scraps to a phone company while the world they had helped create moved on without them. If you are building something right now, a channel, a business, a brand, a project, a career, remember this. The competition is not your greatest threat. Your own success is. The day you stop questioning whether the best version of what you are building still has not been built yet is the day someone else starts building it. And they will build it better. And stay hungry. Stay obsessed. Stay building. This has been Old Money Empire.